I recently replaced the strut mounts in my '99 Toyota minivan. Here's what it sounds like when they fail. And here's what it looks like when they fail. So here you're looking at the top of the strut mount. It's this black bit here. This is the top of the strut itself with a big nut holding it on. This view is looking directly from the top. It's looking at the driver's side strut tower. To the left here you can see my leading edge of my windshield on my van. So I'll hit play and you'll see it move when I turn the steering wheel. Wheels of the vehicle are on the ground. It's got to be loaded. Yeah, you can see it. You'll be able to hear it clacking. I'm turning the steering wheel back and forth to make that happen. So, what happened in my particular strut mounts was that you have the strut here, and then you have this outer shell, and in between the strut and the outer shell is a rubber buffer. That rubber buffer, on inspection, looks perfect, but what happened is it came apart from the inside of the steel outer shell. So you couldn't tell by looking at it. You had to hear it, and you had to turn the steering wheel and watch it to see how much play it had. A very small amount of play is normal, but this is obviously excessive. So I can show you the strut mount itself. This is the one from the video. It's got that steel collar that the strut goes through, and then the outer steel shell, and then this rubber in between here, and that rubber is what ultimately, essentially it shrank, and I'll talk about that right now as far as the other evidence that you'll find that your strut mount is the culprit for the noise you're hearing. First off, the noise is obvious. The second thing is you'll start to lose control of the vehicle in minor ways. I noticed, especially going around a sweeping curve, suddenly the van might drift a little bit one way or the other, and you turn the wheel to correct and it didn't quite correct very quickly, and it gives a very strong impression that you don't have total control of your vehicle, and that's very unnerving. Behaves the same in like a crosswind, where it'll push your vehicle to one side and you'll correct, but you'll notice that the correction isn't happening quite like it should be. In a straight line, you don't really notice it. The noise you notice when you hit a dip or a crack in the road more than when you hit a bump. It's when your wheels dip down and come back real quick. It unloads that suspension for a fraction of a second, and that's where you get that clanking, is when your suspension is loose for that little bit. You'll also notice that the sound is louder or more prevalent when it's cold, because the rubber is going to be harder then. When it's warm, the rubber will expand a little bit and get a little bit softer. The sound might either become much less noticeable, or it might go away completely. Also, I'll talk a little bit about when you go to replace these, the view that you have here on my minivan. To get this view, I had to remove the whole front cowling and the windshield wiper assembly. Here's what it looks like without that removed. This is looking from the front. You have the air box right up in the foreground. This is the strut mount that you saw in the previous video. You can still see it. I'll play this video and you'll see it moving. It's just more difficult to see, and obviously to replace it you have to remove all this other stuff, this cowling and all that. Yeah, you see it move. Another thing that I would say is when you go to replace the strut mount, you have to remove the strut. and what you see in this photo is the bottom of the strut here, two big bolts. You can only see one of them, the other one's down here somewhere. Two big bolts that hold the strut to the steering knuckle. This is where your bearing and all that lives. It's a big chunk. Before I remove these bolts, I like to take a paint marker and mark the rotational orientation of the bolt. The reason being, on my van it didn't matter, but on some vehicles this bolt will be what's called an eccentric bolt, which means inside the knuckle the bolt isn't straight and round. There's actually an off-center lobe, so that by loosening the nut and turning the bolt you can change the camber. They do that in the alignment shop. So by marking this bolt, you'll be able to set it back where it was when you reassemble everything, and your camber will be very, very close, if not dead on, to where it was before you disassembled it. It is recommended to get your vehicle realigned after you remove these bolts. And for that same reason, you never want to put an impact on this bolt. You always take the nut off first and then remove this bolt by hand. I'm not going to go into the whole process of replacing strut mounts. There are other videos that explain it much better than I could. I just wanted to point this out because a lot of videos don't mention it. The second thing that I would point out real quick before I go is that you need a spring compressor to do this job, because you have to disassemble the strut assembly. I opted for the Harbor Freight one, Maddox brand or whatever the hell it is. It's made in Taiwan. It's not made in China, so you can infer the quality is a little better. On inspection, the quality looked excellent. For $35, I mean, I had no qualms about using it. 10 years ago, I would not have said that about Harbor Freight tools, but this one was great. It worked perfectly. It didn't bend. Obviously, it didn't break. It's ready to be used again and again. So yeah, if you're on the fence about buying the Harbor Freight one, as I was, I wouldn't hesitate. I'd recommend that tool. So yeah, that's my experience with my failed strut mounts. That's it.